Chapter 4. The Nunnery. The night seemed short, for the girls, tired by their journey, slept like dormice. About 7 o'clock Katy was roused by the click of a blind, and opening her eyes, saw Clover standing in the window and peeping out through the half-opened shutters. When she heard Katy move, she cried out, "Oh, do come, it's so interesting. I can see the colleges and the church and, I guess, the nunnery, only I'm not quite sure because the houses are all so much alike." Katy jumped up and hurried to the window. The hotel stood on one side of a green common planted with trees. The common had a lead-colored fence and gravel paths which ran across it from corner to corner. Opposite the hotel was a long row of red buildings, broken by one or two brown ones with cupolas. These were evidently the colleges, and a large gray building with a spire was as evidently the church. But which one of the many white, green-blinded houses which filled the other sides of the common was the nunnery, the girls could not tell. Clover thought it was one with a garden at the side, but Katy thought not, because Lily had said nothing of a garden. They discussed the point so long that the breakfast bell took them by surprise, and they were forced to rush through their dressing as fast as possible so as not to keep Papa waiting. When breakfast was over, Dr. Carr told them to put on their hats and get ready to walk with him to the school. Clover took one arm and Katy the other, and the three passed between some lead-colored posts and took one of the diagonal paths which led across the common. "That's the house," said Dr. Carr, pointing. "It isn't the one you picked out, Clover," said Katy. "No," replied Clover, a little disappointed. The house Papa indicated was by no means so pleasant as the one she had chosen. It was a tall, narrow building with dormer windows in the roof, and a square porch supported by whitewashed pillars. A pile of trunks stood in the porch. From above came sounds of voices. Girls' heads were popped out of upper windows at the swinging of the gate, and as the door opened more heads appeared looking over the balusters from the hall above. The parlor into which they were taken was full of heavy, old-fashioned furniture, stiffly arranged. The sofa and chairs were covered with black haircloth and stood closely against the wall. Some books lay upon the table, arranged 2 by 2, each upper book being exactly at a right angle with each lower book. A bunch of dried grasses stood in the fireplace. There were no pictures, except one portrait in oils of a forbidding old gentleman in a wig and glasses, sitting with his finger majestically inserted in a half-open Bible. Altogether it was not a cheerful room, nor one calculated to raise the spirits of newcomers, and Katy, whose long seclusion had made her sensitive to the subject of rooms, shrank instinctively nearer Papa as they went in. 2 ladies rose to receive them. One, a tall, dignified person, was Mrs. Florence. The other she introduced as my assistant principal, Mrs. Nipson. Mrs. Nipson was not tall. She had a round face, pinched lips, and half-shut gray eyes. "This lady is fully associated with me in the management of the school," explained Mrs. Florence. "When I go she will assume entire control." "Is that likely to be soon?" inquired Dr. Carr, surprised, and not well pleased that the teacher of whom he had heard, and with whom he had proposed to leave his children, was planning to yield her place to a stranger. "The time is not yet determined," replied Mrs. Florence. Then she changed the subject gracefully, but so decidedly that Dr. Carr had no chance for further question. She spoke of classes, and discussed what Katy and Clover were to study. Finally she proposed to take them upstairs to see their room. Papa might come too, she said. "I dare say that Lily Page, who tells me that she is a cousin of yours, has described the arrangements of the house," she remarked to Katy. "The room I have assigned to you is in the back building. Quaker Row, the girls call it." She smiled as she spoke, and Katy, meeting her eyes for the first time, felt that there was something in what Lily had said. Mrs. Florence was a sort of queen. They went upstairs. Some girls who were peeping over the baluster hurried away at their approach. Mrs. Florence shook her head at them. "The first day is always one of license," she said, leading the way along an uncarpeted entry to a door at the end, from which, by a couple of steps, they went down into a square room, round 3 sides of which ran a shelf, on which stood rows of wash-bowls and pitchers. Above were hooks for towels. Katy perceived that this was the much-dreaded washroom. "Our lavatory," remarked Mrs. Florence blandly. Opening from the washroom was a very long hall, lighted at each end by a window. The doors on either side were numbered 1, 2, 3, and so on. Some of them were half open. As they went by, Katy and Clover caught glimpses of girls and trunks, and beds strewed with things. At number 6 Mrs. Florence paused. "Here is the room which I propose to give you," she said. Katy and Clover looked eagerly about. It was a small room, but the sun shone in cheerfully at the window. There was a maple bedstead and table, a couple of chairs, and a row of hooks. That was all, except that in the wall was set a case of black-handled drawers, with cupboard doors above them. "These take the place of a bureau and hold your clothes," explained Mrs. Florence, pulling out one of the drawers. "I hope, when once you are settled, you will find yourselves comfortable. The rooms are small, but young people do not require so much space as older ones. Though, indeed, your elder daughter, Dr. Carr, looks more advanced and grown up than I was prepared to find her. What did you say was her age?" "She is past 16, but she has been so long confined to her room by the illness of which I wrote, that you may probably find her behind in some respects. Which reminds me," this was very adroit of papa, "I am anxious that she should keep up the system to which she has been accustomed at home, among other things, sponge baths of cold water every morning, and as I see that the bedrooms are not furnished with washstands, I will ask your permission to provide one for the use of my little girls. Perhaps you will kindly tell me where I could look for it?" Mrs. Florence was not pleased, but she could not object, so she mentioned a shop. Katy's heart gave a bound of relief. She thought No. 6, with a washstand, might be very comfortable. Its bareness and simplicity had the charm of novelty. Then there was something very interesting to her in the idea of a whole house full of girls. They did not stay long after seeing the room, but went off on a shopping excursion. Shops were few and far between at Hillsover, but they found a neat little maple washstand and rocking-chair, and papa also brought a comfortable low chair with a slatted back and a cushion. This was for Katy. "Never study till your back aches," he told her. "When you are tired, lie flat on the bed for half an hour, and tell Mrs. Florence that it was by my direction." "Or Mrs. Nipson," said Katy, laughing rather ruefully. She had taken no fancy to Mrs. Nipson, and did not enjoy the idea of a divided authority. A hurried lunch at the hotel followed, and then it was time for Dr. Carr to go away. They all walked to the school together and said good-bye upon the steps. The girls would not cry, but they clung very tightly to papa, and put as much feeling into their last kisses as would have furnished forth half a dozen fits of tears. Lily might have thought them cold-hearted, but papa did not. He knew better. "That's my brave girls," he said. Then he kissed them once more, and hurried away. Perhaps he did not wish them to see that his eyes, too, were a little misty. As the door closed behind them, Katy and Clover realized that they were alone among strangers. The sensation was not pleasant, and they felt forlorn as they went upstairs and down Quaker Row toward No. 6. "Aha! So you're going to be next door," said a gay voice as they passed No. 5, and Rose Red popped her head into the hall. "Well, I'm glad," she went on, shaking hands cordially. "I sort of thought you would, and yet I didn't know. And there are some awful stiffies among the new girls. How do you both do?" "Oh, are we next door to you?" cried Clover, brightening. "Yes, it's rather good of me not to hate you, for I wanted the end room myself, and Mrs. Florence wouldn't give it to me. Come in and let me introduce you to my roommate. It's against the rules, but that's no matter. Nobody pretends to keep rules the first day." They went in. No. 5 was precisely like No. 6 in shape, size, and furniture, but Rose had unpacked her trunk and decorated the room with odds and ends of all sorts. The table was covered with books and boxes, colored lithographs were pinned on the walls, a huge blue rosette ornamented the headboard of the bed, the blinds were tied together with pink ribbon. Over the top of the window was a festoon of hemlock boughs, fresh and spicy. The effect was fantastic but cheery, and Katy and Clover exclaimed with one voice, "How pretty!" The roommate was a pale, shy girl, with a half-scared look in her eyes, and small hands which twisted uneasily together when she moved and spoke. Her name was Mary Silver. She and Rose were so utterly unlike that Katy thought it odd they should have chosen to be together. Afterward she understood it better. Rose liked to protect, and Mary to be protected. Rose to talk, and Mary to listen. Mary evidently considered Rose the most entertaining creature in the world. She giggled violently at all her jokes, and then stopped short and covered her mouth with her fingers in a frightened way, as if giggling were wrong. "Only think, Mary," began Rose, after introducing Katy and Clover. "These young ladies have got the end room. What do you suppose was the reason that Mrs. Florence did not give it to us? It's very peculiar." Mary laughed her uneasy laugh. She looked as if she could tell the reason, but did not dare. "Never mind," continued Rose. "Trials are good for one, they say. It's something to have nice people in the room if we can't be there ourselves. You are nice, aren't you?" turning to Clover. "Very," replied Clover, laughing. "I thought so. I can almost always tell without asking. Still, it is something to have it on the best authority. We'll be good neighbors, won't we? Look here." She pulled one of the black-handled drawers completely out and laid it on the bed. "Do you see? Your drawers are exactly behind ours. At any time in silent study hour, if I have something to say, I'll rap and pop a note into your drawer, and you can do the same to me. Isn't it fun?" Clover said yes, but Katy, though she laughed, shook her head. "Don't entice us into mischief," she said. "Oh, gracious!" exclaimed Rose. "Now are you going to be good, you two? If you are, just break the news at once and have it over. I can bear it. She fanned herself in such a comical way that no one could help laughing. Mary Silver joined, but stopped pretty soon in her sudden manner. "There's Mary now," went on Rose. "She's a paragon. But if any more are coming into the entry, just give me fair notice, and I pack and move up among the sinners in attic row. Somehow, you don't look like paragons either. You especially," nodding to Clover. "Your eyes are like violets. But so are Sylvia's, that's my sister, and she's the greatest witch in Massachusetts. Eyes are dreadfully deceitful things. As for you," to Katy, "you're so tall that I can't take you in all at once. But the piece I see doesn't look dreadful a bit." Rose was sitting in the window as she made these remarks, and leaning forward suddenly, she gave a pretty, blushing nod to someone below. Katy glanced down and saw a handsome young man replacing the cap he had lifted from his head. "That's Barry Searles," said Rose. "He's the president's son, you know. He always comes through the side yard to get to his room. That's it, the one with the red curtain. It's exactly opposite your window, don't you see?" "So it is," exclaimed Katy, remembering what Lily had said. "Oh, was that the reason—" She stopped, afraid of being rude. "The reason we wanted the room?" inquired Rose coolly. "Well, I don't know. It hadn't occurred to me to look at it in that light." "Mary!" with sudden severity. "Is it possible that you had Barry Searles in your mind when you were so pertinacious about that room?" "Rose, how can you? You know I never thought of such a thing," protested poor Mary. "I hope not. Otherwise I should feel it my duty to consult with Mrs. Florence on the subject," went on Rose, with an air of dignified admonition. "I consider myself responsible for you and your morals, Mary. Let us change this painful subject." She looked gravely at the three girls for a moment. Then her lips began to twitch, the irresistible dimples appeared in her cheeks, and throwing herself back in her chair, she burst into a fit of laughter. "Oh, Mary, you blessed goose! Some day or other you'll be the death of me. Dear, dear, how I am behaving! It's perfectly horrid of me, and I didn't mean it. I'm going to be real good this term. I promised Mother. Please forget it and don't take a dislike to me and never come again," she added coaxingly as Katy and Clover rose to go. "Indeed we won't," replied Katy. As for sensible Clover, she was already desperately in love with Rose on that very first day. After a couple of hours of hard work, number 6 was in order and looked like a different place. Fringed towels were laid over the washstand and the table. Dr. Carr's photograph and some pretty chromos ornamented the walls. The rocking chair and the study chair stood by the window. The trunks were hidden by chintz covers, made for the purpose by old Mary. On the window-sill stood Cousin Helen's vase, which Katy had brought carefully packed among her clothes. "Now," she said, tying the blinds together with a knot of ribbon in imitation of rose reds, "when we get a bunch of wildflowers for my vase, we shall be all right." A tap at the door. Rose entered. "Are you done?" she asked. "May I come in and see?" "Oh, this is pretty," she exclaimed, looking about. "How you can tell in 1 minute what sort of a girl one is, just by looking at her room. I should know you had been neat and dainty and housekeeperly all your days. And you would see in a minute that I'm a Madge Wildfire, and that Ellen Gray is a saint, and Sally Satterley is a scatterbrain, and Lily Page an affected little Oh, I forgot. She's your cousin, isn't she? How dreadfully rude of me," dimpling at Clover, who couldn't help dimpling back again. "Oh, my," she went on, "a washstand, I declare! Where did you get it?" "Papa bought it," explained Katy. "He asked Mrs. Florence's permission." "How bright of him! I shall just write to my father to ask for permission, too." Which she did, and the result was that it set the fashion of washstands, and so many papas wrote to ask permission that Mrs. Florence found it necessary to give up the lavatory system and provide washstands for the whole house. Katy's request had been an opening wedge. I do not think this fact made her more popular with the principals. "By the way, where is Lily?" asked Katy. "I haven't seen her today." "Do you want to know? I can tell you. She is sitting on the edge of one chair with her feet on the rung of another chair, and her head on the shoulder of her roommate, who is dying to get away and arrange her drawers, and she is crying." "How do you know? Have you been up to see her?" "Oh, I haven't seen her. It isn't necessary. I saw her last term and the term before. She always spends the first day at school in that way. I'll take you up if you'd like to examine for yourselves." Katy and Clover, much amused, followed as she led the way upstairs. Sure enough, Lily was sitting exactly as Rose had predicted. Her face was swollen from crying. When she saw the girls, her sobs redoubled. "Oh, isn't it dreadful?" she demanded. "I shall die. I know I shall. Oh, why did Pa make me come?" "Now, Lily, don't be an idiot," said the unsympathizing Rose. Then she sat down and proceeded to make a series of the most grotesque faces, winking her eyes and twinkling her fingers round the head of Niobe, as she called Lily, till the other girls were in fits of laughter, and Niobe, though she shrugged her shoulders pettishly and said, "Don't be so ridiculous, Rose Red," was forced to give way. First she smiled, then a laugh was heard. Afterward she announced that she felt better. "That's right, Niobe," said Rose. "Wash your face now and get ready for tea, for the bell is just going to ring. As for you, Annie, you might as well put your drawers in order," with a wicked wink. Annie hurried away with a laugh, which she tried in vain to hide. "You heartless creature," cried the exasperated Lily. "I believe you're made of marble. You haven't one bit of feeling, nor you either, Katy. You haven't cried a drop." "Given this problem," said the provoking Rose, "when the nose without is as red as a lobster, what must be the temperature of the heart within, and vice versa?" The tea bell rang just in time to avert a fresh flood of tears from Lily. She brushed her hair in angry haste, and they all hurried down by a side staircase which, as Rose explained, the schoolgirls were expected to use. The dining room was not large. Only part of the girls could be seated at a time, so they took turns at dining at the first table, half one week and half the next. Mrs. Nipson sat at the tea tray, with Mrs. Florence beside her. At the other end of the long board sat a severe-looking person, whom Lily announced in a whisper as that horrid Miss Jane. The meal was very simple: tea, bread and butter, and dried beef. It was eaten in silence. The girls were not allowed to speak except to ask for what they wanted. Rose Red, indeed, who sat next to Mrs. Florence, talked to her, and even ventured once or twice on daring little jokes, which caused Clover to regard her with admiring astonishment. No one else said anything, except "Butter, please," or "Pass the bread." As they filed upstairs after this cheerless meal, they were met by rows of hungry girls who were waiting to go down, and who whispered, "How long you've been! What's for tea?" The evening passed in making up classes and arranging for recitation rooms and study hours. Katy was glad when bedtime came. The day, with all its new impressions and strange faces, seemed to her like a confused dream. She and Clover undressed very quietly. Among the printed rules which hung on the bedroom door they read, "All communication between roommates after the retiring bell has rung is strictly prohibited." Just then it did not seem difficult to keep this rule. It was only after the candle was blown out that Clover ventured to whisper, very low indeed, for who knew but Miss Jane was listening outside the door, "Do you think we're going to like it?" And Katy, in the same cautious whisper, responded, "I'm not quite sure." And so ended the first day at the nunnery. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Roses and Thorns. "Oh, what is it? What has happened?" cried Clover, starting up in bed the next morning as a clanging sound roused her suddenly from sleep. It was only the rising bell, ringing at the end of Quaker Row. Katy held her watch up to the dim light. She could just see the hands. Yes, they pointed to 6. It was actually morning. She and Clover jumped up and began to dress as fast as possible. "We've only got half an hour," said Clover, unhooking the rules and carrying them to the window. "Half an hour, and this says that we must turn the mattress, smooth the undersheet over the bolster, and spend 5 minutes in silent devotion. We'll have to be quick to do all that besides dressing ourselves." It is never easy to be quick when one is in a hurry. Everything sets itself against you. Fingers turn into thumbs, dresses won't button, nor pins keep their place. With all their haste, Katy and Clover were barely ready when the second bell sounded. As they hastened downstairs, Katy fastening her breastpin and Clover her cuffs, they met other girls, some looking half asleep, some half dressed, all yawning, rubbing their eyes and complaining of the early hour. "Isn't it horrid?" said Lily Page, hurrying by with no collar on and her hair hastily tucked into a net. "I never get up till 9 o'clock when I'm at home. Ma saves my breakfast for me. She says I shall have my sleep out while I have the chance." "You don't look quite awake now," remarked Clover. "No, because I haven't washed my face. Half the time I don't before breakfast. There's that old mattress that has to be turned, and when I sleep over I just do that first and then scramble my clothes on best way I can, anything not to be marked." After prayers and breakfasts were done, the girls had half an hour for putting their bedrooms to rights, during which interval it is to be hoped that Lily found time to wash her face. After that lessons began, and lasted till 1 o'clock. Dinner followed, with an hour's recreation. Then the bell rang for silent study hour, when the girls sat with their books in their bedrooms, but were not allowed to speak to each other. Next came a walk. "Who are you going to walk with?" asked Rose Red, meeting Clover in Quaker Row. "I don't know. Katy, I guess." "Are you really? You and she like each other, don't you? Do you know you're the first sisters I ever knew at school who did? Generally they quarrel awfully. The Stearns girls, who were here last term, scarcely spoke to each other. They didn't even room together, and Sarah Stearns was always telling tales against Sue and Sue against Sarah." "How disgusting! I never heard of anything so mean," cried Clover indignantly. "Why, I wouldn't tell tales about Katy if we quarreled ever so much. We never do, though. Katy is so sweet." "I suppose she is," said Rose rather doubtfully. "But do you know, I'm sort of afraid of her. It's because she's so tall. Tall people always scare me. And then she looks so grave and grown up. Don't tell her I said so, though, for I want her to like me." "Oh, she isn't a bit grave or grown up. She's the funniest girl in the world. Wait till you know her," replied loyal Clover. "I'd give anything if I could walk with you part of this term," went on Rose, putting her arm around Clover's waist. "But you see, unluckily, I'm engaged straight through. All of us old girls are. I walk with May Mather this week and next, then Esther Dearborn for a month, then Lily Page for 2 weeks, and all the rest of the time with Mary. I can't think why I promised Lily. I'm sure I don't want to go with her. I'd ask Mary to let me off, only I'm afraid she'd feel bad. I say, suppose we engage now to walk with each other for the first half of next term." "Why, that's not till October," said Clover. "I know it, but it's nice to be beforehand. Will you?" "Of course I will, provided that Katy has somebody pleasant to go with," replied Clover, immensely flattered at being asked by the popular Rose. They ran downstairs and took their places in the long procession of girls, who were ranged 2 and 2, ready to start. Miss Jane walked at the head, and Miss Marsh, another teacher, brought up the rear. Rose Red whispered that it was like a funeral and a caravan mixed, as cheerful as hearses at both ends, and wild beasts in the middle. The walk was along a wooded road, a mile out and a mile back. The procession was not permitted to stop or straggle, or take any of the liberties which make walking pleasant. Still, Katy and Clover enjoyed it. There was a spring smell in the air, and the woods were beginning to be pretty. They even found a little trailing arbutus blossoming in a sunny hollow. Lily was just in front of them and amused them with histories of different girls, whom she pointed out in the long line. That was Esther Dearborn, Rose Red's friend. Handsome, wasn't she, but awfully sarcastic. The 2 next were Amy Alsop and Ellen Gray. They always walked together because they were so intimate. Yes, they were nice enough, only so distressingly good. Amy did not get 1 single mark last term. That child with pigtails was Bella Arkwright. Why on earth did Katy want to know her? She was a nasty little thing. "She's just about Elsie's height," replied Katy. "Who's that pretty girl with pink velvet on her hat?" "Dear me, do you think she's pretty? I don't. Her name is Louisa Agnew. She lives at Ashburn, quite near us, but we don't know them. Her family are not at all in good society." "What a pity. She looks sweet and ladylike." Lily tossed her head. "They're quite common people," she said. "They live in a little mite of a house, and her father paints portraits." "But I should think that would be nice. Doesn't she ever take you to see his pictures?" "Take me?" cried Lily indignantly. "I should think not. I tell you we don't visit. I just speak when we're here, but I never see her when I'm at home." "Move on, young ladies. What are you stopping for?" cried Miss Jane. "Yes, move on," muttered Rose Red from behind. "Don't you hear, Policeman X?" From walking hour till tea-time was recreation again. Lily improved this opportunity to call at number 6. She had waited to see how the girls were likely to take in school before committing herself to intimacy, but now that Rose Red had declared in their favor, she was ready to begin to be friendly. "How lovely," she said, looking about. "You got the end room after all, didn't you? What splendid times you'll have. Oh, how plainly you can see Barry Searle's window. Has he spoken to you yet?" "Spoken to us? Of course not. Why should he?" replied Katy. "He doesn't know us, and we don't know him." "That's nothing. Half the girls in the school bow and speak and carry on with young men they don't know. You won't have a bit of fun if you're so particular." "I don't want that kind of fun," replied Katy with energy in her voice. "Neither does Clover. And I can't imagine how the girls can behave so. It isn't ladylike at all." Katy was very fond of this word, ladylike. She always laid great stress upon it. It seemed in some way to be connected with Cousin Helen, and to mean everything that was good and graceful and sweet. "Dear me, I'd no idea you were so dreadfully proper," said Lily, pouting. "Mother said you were as prim and precise as your grandmother, but I didn't suppose—" "How unkind!" broke in Clover, taking fire as usual at any affront to Katy. "Katy prim and precise? She isn't a bit. She's twice as much fun as the rest of you girls. But it's nice fun, not this horrid stuff about students. I wish your mother wouldn't say such things." She didn't, I don't mean exactly that," stammered Lily, frightened by Clover's indignant eyes. "All I meant was that Katy's dreadfully dignified for her age, and we bad girls will have to look out. You needn't be so mad, Clover. I'm sure it's very nice to be proper and good and set an example." "I don't want to preach to anybody," said Katy, coloring, "and I wasn't thinking about examples, but really and truly, Lily, wouldn't your mother and all the girls' mothers be shocked if they knew about these performances here?" "Gracious, I should think so. Ma would kill me. I wouldn't have her know of my goings-on for all the world." Just then Rose pulled out a drawer and called through to ask if Clover would please come in and help her a minute. Lily took advantage of her absence to say, "I came on purpose to ask you to walk with me for 4 weeks. Will you?" "Thank you, but I'm engaged to Clover." "To Clover? But she's your sister. You can get off." "I don't want to get off. Clover and I dearly like to go together." Lily stared. "Well, I never heard of such a thing," she said. "You're really romantic. The girls will call you the Inseparables." "I wouldn't mind being inseparable from Clover," said Katy, laughing. Next day was Saturday. It was nominally a holiday, but so many tasks were set for it that it hardly seemed like one. The girls had to practice in the gymnasium, to do their mending, and have all drawers in apple-pie order before afternoon, when Miss Jane went through the rooms on a tour of inspection. Saturday also was the day for writing home letters. So altogether it was about the busiest of the week. Early in the morning Miss Jane appeared in Quaker Row with some slips of paper in her hand, one of which she left at each door. They told the hours at which the girls were to go to the bath-house. "You will carry each a crash towel, a sponge, and soap," she announced to Katy, "and will be in the entry at the foot of the stairs at 25 minutes after 9 precisely. Failures in punctuality will be punished by a mark." Miss Jane always delivered her words like a machine, and closed her mouth with a snap at the end of a sentence. "Horrid thing! Don't I wish her missionary would come and carry her off? Not that I blame him for staying away," remarked Rose Red from her door, making a face at Miss Jane as she walked down the entry. "I don't understand about the bath-house," said Katy. "Does it belong to us? And where is it?" "No, it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to Mr. Parrott, and anybody can use it. Only on Saturday it is reserved for us nuns. Haven't you ever noticed it when we've been out walking? It's in that street by the bakery, which we pass to take the Lebanon road. We go across the green and down by Professor Seacombe's, and we are in plain sight from the college all the way, and of course those abominable boys sit there with spy-glasses and stare as hard as ever they can. It's perfectly horrid. A crash towel, a sponge, and soap, indeed. I wish I could make Miss Jane eat the pieces of soap which she has forced me to carry across this village." "Oh, Rose!" remonstrated Mary Silver. "Well, I do. And the crash towels afterward, by way of dessert," replied the incorrigible Rose. "Never mind. Just wait. A bright idea strikes me." "Oh? What?" cried the other three. But Rose only pursed up her mouth, arched her eyebrows, and vanished into her own room, locking the door behind her. Mary Silver, finding herself shut out, sat down meekly in the hall till such time as it should please Rose to open the door. This was not till the bath hour. As Katy and Clover went by, Rose put her head out and called that she would be down in a minute. The bathing party consisted of 8 girls, with Miss Jane for escort. They were halfway across the common before Miss Jane noticed that everybody was shaking with stifled laughter, except Rose, who walked along demurely, apparently unconscious that there was anything to laugh at. Miss Jane looked sharply from one to another for a moment, then stopped short and exclaimed, "Rosamond Redding! How dare you?" "What is it, ma'am?" asked Rose, with the face of a lamb. "Your bath-towel! Your sponge!" gasped Miss Jane. "Yes, ma'am. I have them all," replied the audacious Rose, putting her hand to her hat. There, to be sure, was the long crash towel, hanging down behind like a veil, while the sponge was fastened on one side like a great cockade, and in front appeared a cake of pink soap, neatly pinned into the middle of a black velvet bow. Miss Jane seized Rose and removed these ornaments in a twinkling. "We shall see what Mrs. Florence thinks of this conduct," she grimly remarked. Then, dropping the soap and sponge in her own pocket, she made Rose walk beside her, as if she were a criminal in custody. The bath-house was a neat place, with 8 small rooms, well supplied with hot and cold water. Katy would have found her bath very nice, had it not been for the thought of the walk home. They must look so absurd, she reflected, with their sponges and damp towels. Miss Jane was as good as her word. After dinner, Rose was sent for by Mrs. Florence and had an interview of 2 hours with her. She came out with red eyes and shut herself into her room with a disconsolate bang. Before long, however, she revived sufficiently to tap on the drawers and push through a note with the following words: "My heart is broken. R.R." Clover hastened in to comfort her. Rose was sitting on the floor with a very clean pocket-handkerchief in her hand. She wept and put her head against Clover's knee. "I suppose I'm the nastiest girl in the world," she said. "Mrs. Florence thinks so. She said I was an evil influence in the school. Wasn't that unkind?" with a little sob. "I meant to be so good this term," she went on, "but what's the use? A codfish might as well try to play the piano. It was always so, even when I was a baby. Sylvia says I have got a little fiend inside of me. Is it that makes me so horrid?" Clover purred over her. She could not bear to have Rose feel badly. "Wasn't Miss Jane funny?" went on Rose with a sudden twinkle. "And did you see Barry and Alfred Seacombe?" "No. Where were they?" "Close to us, standing by the fence. All the time Miss Jane was unpinning the towel they were splitting their sides, and Barry made such a face at me that I nearly laughed out. That boy has a perfect genius for faces. He used to frighten Sylvia and me into fits when we were little tots up here on visits." "Then you knew him before you came to school?" "Oh dear, yes. I know all the Hillsover boys. We used to make mud pies together. They're grown up now, most of 'em, and in college, and when we meet we're very dignified and say Miss Redding and Mr. Seacombe and Mr. Searles, but we're just as good friends as ever. When I go to take tea with Mrs. Seacombe, Alfred always invites Barry to drop in, and we have the greatest fun. Mrs. Florence won't let me go this term, though, I guess, she's so mad about the towel." Katy was quite relieved when Clover reported this conversation. Rose, for all her wickedness, seemed to be a little lady. Katy did not like to class her among the girls who flirted with students whom they did not know. It was wonderful how soon they all settled down and became accustomed to their new life. Before 6 weeks were over, Katy and Clover felt as if they had lived at Hillsover for years. This was partly because there was so much to do. Nothing makes time fly like having every moment filled and every hour set apart for a distinct employment. They made several friends, chief among whom were Ellen Gray and Louisa Agnew. This last intimacy Lily resented highly, and seemed to consider as an affront to herself. With no one, however, was Katy so intimate as Clover was with Rose Red. This cost Katy some jealous pangs at first. She was so used to considering Clover her own exclusive property that it was not easy to share her with another, and she had occasional fits of feeling resentful and injured, and left out. These were but momentary, however. Katy was too healthy of mind to let unkind feelings grow, and by she grew fond of Rose and Rose of her, so that in the end the sisters shared the friend, as they did other nice things, and neither of them was jealous of the other. But charming as she was, a certain price had to be paid for the pleasure of intimacy with Rose. Her overflowing spirits and the little fiend inside her were always provoking scrapes, in which her friends were apt to be more or less involved. She was very penitent and afflicted after these scrapes, but it didn't make a bit of difference. The next time she was just as naughty as ever. "What are you?" said Katy one day, meeting her in the hall with a heap of black shawls and aprons on her arm. "Hush!" whispered Rose mysteriously. "Don't say a word. Senator Brown is dead, our senator, you know. I'm going to put my window into mourning for him, that's all. It's a proper token of respect." 2 hours later, Mrs. Nipson, walking sedately across the common, noticed quite a group of students in the president's yard looking up at the nunnery. She drew nearer. They were admiring Rose's window, hung with black and decorated with a photograph of the deceased senator, suspended in the middle of a wreath of weeping willow. Of course, she hurried upstairs and tore down the shawls and aprons, and equally of course, Rose had a lecture and a mark. But dear me, what good did it do? The next day but one, as Katy and Clover sat together in silent study hour, their lower drawer was pushed open very noiselessly and gently till it came out entirely and lay on the floor, and in the aperture thus formed appeared Rose's saucy face, flushed with mischief. She was crawling through from her own room. "Such fun!" she whispered. "I never thought of this before. We can have parties in study hours and all sorts of things." "Oh, go back, Rosie," whispered Clover in agonized entreaty, though laughing all the time. "Go back? Not at all. I'm coming in," answered Rose, pulling herself through a little farther. But at that moment the door opened. There stood Miss Jane. She had caught the buzz of voices as she passed in the hall, and had entered to see what was going on. Rose, dreadfully frightened, made a rapid movement to withdraw, but the space was narrow and she had wedged herself and could move neither backward nor forward. She had to submit to being helped through by Miss Jane in a series of pulls, while Katy and Clover sat by, not daring to laugh or to offer assistance. When Rose was on her feet, Miss Jane released her with a final shake, which she seemed unable to refrain from giving. "Go to your room," she said. "I shall report all of you young ladies for this flagrant act of disobedience." Rose went, and in 2 minutes the drawer, which Miss Jane had replaced, opened again, and there was this note: "If I'm never heard of more, give my love to my family and mention how I died. I forgive my enemies and leave Clover my band bracelet. My blessings on you both. With the deepest regard, your afflicted friend, R.R." Mrs. Florence was very angry on this occasion, and would listen to no explanations, but gave Katy and Clover a disobedience mark also. This was very unfair, and Rose felt dreadfully about it. She begged and entreated, but Mrs. Florence only replied, "There is blame on both sides, I have no doubt." "She's entirely changed from what she used to be," declared Rose. "I don't know what's the matter. I don't like her half so much as I did." The truth was that Mrs. Florence had secretly determined to give up her connection with the school at midsummer, and regarding it now rather as Mrs. Nipson's school than her own, she took no pains to study character or mete out justice carefully among scholars with whom she was not likely to have much to do. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The SSUC. It was Saturday afternoon, and Clover, having finished her practicing, dusting, and mending, had settled herself in number 6 for a couple of hours of quiet enjoyment. Everything was in beautiful order to meet Miss Jane's inspecting eye, and Clover, as she sat in the rocking-chair, writing case in lap, looked extremely cosy and comfortable. A half-finished letter to Elsie lay in the writing-case, but Clover felt lazy, and instead of writing was looking out of the window in a dreamy way to where Barry Searles and some other young men were playing ball in the yard below. She was not thinking of them or of anything else in particular. A vague sense of pleasant idleness possessed her, and it was like the breaking of a dream when the door opened and Katy came in, not quietly after her wont, but with a certain haste and indignant rustle, as if vexed by something. When she saw Clover at the window, she cried out hastily, "Oh, Clover, don't!" "Don't what?" asked Clover without turning her head. "Don't sit there looking at those boys." "Why? Why not? They can't see me. The blinds are shut." "No matter for that. It's just as bad as if they could see you. Don't do it. I can't bear to have you." "Well, I won't then," said Clover good-humoredly, facing round with her back to the window. "I wasn't looking at them either, not exactly. I was thinking about Elsie and John, and wondering— But what's the matter, Katy? What makes you fire up so about it? You've watched the ball playing yourself plenty of times." "I know I have, and I didn't mean to be cross, Clovy. The truth is I'm all put out. These girls with incessant talk about the students make me absolutely sick. It is so unladylike and so bad, especially for the little ones. Fancy that little mite of a Carrie Steele informing me that she is in love with Harry Crosby. In love! A baby like that! She has no business to know that there is such a thing." "Yes," said Clover, laughing. "She wrote his name on a wintergreen lozenge, and bored a hole and hung it round her neck on a blue ribbon, but it melted and stuck to her frock, and she had to take it off." "Whereupon she ate it," added Rose, who came in at that moment. The girls shouted, but Katy soon grew grave. "One can't help laughing," she said. "But isn't it a shame to have such things going on? Just fancy our Elsie behaving so, Clover. Why, papa would have a fit. I declare I've a great mind to get up a society to put down flirting." "Do," said Rose. "What fun it would be! Call it the Society for the Suppression of Young Men. I'll join." "You indeed," replied Katy, shaking her head. "Didn't I see Barry Searles throw a bunch of syringia into your window only this morning?" "Dear me, did he? I shall have to speak to Mary again. It's quite shocking to have her go on so. But really and truly, do let us have a society. It would be so jolly. We could meet on Saturday afternoons, and write pieces, and have signals, and a secret, as Sylvia's society did when she was at school. Get one up, Katy, that's a dear." "But," said Katy, taken aback by having her random idea so suddenly adopted, "if I did get one up, it would be in real earnest, and it would be a society against flirting. And you know you can't help it, Rosie." "Yes, I can. You are doing me great injustice. I don't behave like those girls in Attic Row. I never did. I just bow to Barry and the rest whom I really know, never to anybody else. And you must see, Catherine, darling, that it would be the height of ingratitude if I didn't bow to the boys who made mud pies for me when I was little, and lent me their marbles, and did all sorts of kind things. Now wouldn't it?" coaxingly. "Perhaps," admitted Katy with a smile. "But you're such a witch." "I'm not. Indeed I'm not. I'll be a pillar of society if only you'll provide a society for me to be a pillar of. Now, Katy, do, oh, do." When Rose was in a coaxing mood, few people could resist her. Katy yielded, and between jest and earnest the matter was settled. Katy was to head the plan and invite the members. "Only a few at first," suggested Rose. "When it is proved to be a success and everybody wants to join, we can let in 2 or 3 more as a great favor. What shall the name be? We'll keep it a secret, whatever it is. There's no fun in a society without a secret." "What should the name be?" Rose invented half a dozen, each more absurd than the last. The Auntie Jane Society would sound well, she insisted. Or no, the Put Him Down Club was better yet. Finally they settled upon the Society for the Suppression of Unladylike Conduct. "Only we'll never use the whole name," said Rose. "We'll say the SSUC. That sounds brisk and snappy, and will drive the whole school wild with curiosity. What larks, how I long to begin!" The next Saturday was fixed upon for the first meeting. During the week Katy proposed the plan to the elect few, all of whom accepted enthusiastically. Lily Page was the only person who declined. She said it would be stupid, that for her part she didn't set up to be proper or better than she was, and that in any case she shouldn't wish to be mixed up in a society of which Miss Agnew was a member. The girls did not break their hearts over this refusal. They had felt obliged to ask her for relationship's sake, but everybody was a little relieved that she did not wish to join. Number 6 looked very full indeed that Saturday afternoon when the SSUC came together for the first time. 10 members were present. Mary Silver and Louisa were 2, and Rose's crony Esther Dearborn another. The remaining 4 were Sally Alsop and Amy Erskine, Alice Gibbons, one of the new scholars, whom they all liked but did not know very well, and Ellen Gray, a pale, quiet girl with droll blue eyes, a comical twist to her mouth, and a trick of saying funny things in such a demure way that half the people who listened never found out that they were funny. All Rose's chairs had been borrowed for the occasion. 3 girls sat on the bed and 3 on the floor. With a little squeezing there was plenty of room for everybody. Katy was chosen president, and requested to take the rocking chair as a sign of office. This she did with much dignity, and proceeded to read the constitution and bylaws of the society, which had been drawn up by Rose Red and copied on an immense sheet of blue paper. They ran thus: Constitution for the Society for the Suppression of Unladylike Conduct, known to the uninitiated as the SSUC. Article 1. The object of this society is twofold. It combines having a good time with the pursuit of virtue. Article 2. The good time is to take place once a week in number 6 Quaker Row, between the hours of 4 and 6 p.m. Article 3. The nature of the good time is to be decided upon by committee to be appointed each Saturday by the members of the society. Article 4. Virtue is to be pursued at all times and in all seasons by the members of the society, setting their faces against the practice of bowing and speaking to young gentlemen who are not acquaintances, waving of pocket-handkerchiefs, signals from windows, and any species of conduct which would be thought unladylike by nice people anywhere, and especially by the mammas of the society. Article 5. The members of the society pledge themselves to use their influence against these practices, both by precept and example. In witness whereof we sign Catherine Carr, President; Rosamond Redding, Secretary; Clover E. Carr, Mary L. Silver, Esther Dearborn, Sally P. Alsop, Amy W. Erskine, Alice Gibbons, Ellen Whitworth Gray. Next followed the bylaws. Katy had not been able to see the necessity of having any bylaws, but Rose had insisted. She had never heard of a society without them, she said, and she didn't think it would be legal to leave them out. It had cost her some trouble to invent them, but at last they stood thus. Bylaw number 1. The members of the SSUC will observe the following signals. First, the grip. This is given by inserting the first and middle finger of the right hand between the thumb and fourth finger of the respondent's left, and describing a rotatory motion in the air with the little finger. Nota bene. Much practice is necessary to enable members to exchange this signal in such a manner as not to attract attention. Second, the signal of danger. This signal is for use when Miss Jane or any other foe-woman heaves into sight. It consists in rubbing the nose violently, and at the same time giving 3 stamps on the floor with the left foot. It must be done with an air of unconsciousness. Third, the signal for consultation. This signal is for use when immediate communication is requisite between members of the society. It consists of a pinch on the back of the right hand, accompanied by the word Holofernes pronounced in a low voice. Bylaw number 2. The members of the SSUC pledge themselves to inviolable secrecy about all society proceedings. Bylaw number 3. The members of the SSUC will bring their Saturday cornballs to swell the common entertainment. Bylaw number 4. Members having boxes from home are at liberty to contribute such part of the contents as they please to the aforementioned common entertainment. Here the bylaws ended. There was much laughter over them, especially over the last. "Why did you put that in, Rosie?" asked Ellen Gray. "It strikes me as hardly necessary." "Oh," replied Rose, "I put that in to encourage Silvery Mary there. She's expecting a box soon, and I knew that she would pine to give the society a share, but would be too timid to propose it, so I thought I would just pave the way." "How truly kind," laughed Clover. "Now," said the president, "the entertainment of the meeting will begin by the reading of Trailing Arbutus, a poem by C.E.C." Clover had been very unwilling to read the first piece, and had only yielded after much coaxing from Rose, who had bestowed upon her in consequence the name of Quintia Curtia. She felt very shy as she stood up with her paper in hand, and her voice trembled perceptibly. But after a minute she grew used to the sound of it, and read steadily. Trailing Arbutus. I always think when looking at its mingled rose and white of the pink lips of children put up to say good night. Cuddled its green leaves under, like babies in their beds, its blossoms shy and sunny conceal their pretty heads. And when I lift the blanket up and peep inside of it, they seem to give me smile for smile, nor be afraid a bit. Dear little flower, the earliest of all the flowers that are, twinkling upon the bare brown earth as on the clouds a star. How can we fail to love it well, or prize it more and more? It is the first small signal that winter time is o'er, that spring has not forgotten us, though late and slow she be, but is upon her flying way, and we her face shall see. This production caused quite a sensation among the girls. They had never heard any of Clover's verses before, and thought these wonderful. "Why," cried Sally Alsop, "it is almost as good as Tupper." Sally meant this for a great compliment, for she was devoted to the proverbial philosophy. A poem by E.D. was the next thing on the list. Esther Dearborn rose with great pomp and dignity, cleared her throat, put on a pair of eyeglasses, and began. Miss Jane. Who ran to catch me on the spot, if I the slightest rule forgot, believing and excusing not? Miss Jane. Who lurked outside my door all day, in hopes that I would disobey, and some low-whispered word would say? Miss Jane. Who caught our Rosebud half-way through the wall which parted her from two friends, and that small prank made her rue? Miss Jane. Who is our bane, our foe, our fear, who's always certain to appear just when we do not think her near? Miss Jane. Who down the hall is creeping now with stealthy step, but knowing not how exactly to discover? Broke in Rose, improvising rapidly. Next moment came a knock at the door. It was Miss Jane. Your drawers, Miss Carr, your cupboard, she said, going across the room and examining each in turn. There was no fault to be found with either, so she withdrew, giving the laughing girls a suspicious glance, and remarking that it was a bad habit to sit on beds. It always injured them. "Do you suppose she heard?" whispered Mary Silver. "No, I don't think she did," replied Rose. "Of course, she suspected us of being in some mischief or other. She always does that. Now, Mary, it's your turn to give us an intellectual treat. Begin." Poor Mary shrank back, blushing and protesting. "You know I can't," she said. "I'm too stupid." "Rubbish!" cried Rose. "You're the dearest girl that ever was." She gave Mary's shoulder a reassuring pat. "Mary is excused this time," put in Katy. "It is the first meeting, so I shall be indulgent. But after this, every member will be expected to contribute something for each meeting. I mean to be very strict." "Oh, I never, never can," cried Mary. Rose was down on her at once. "Nonsense! Hush!" she said. "Of course you can. You shall, if I have to write it for you myself." "Order!" said the president, rapping on the table with a pencil. "Rose has something to read us." Rose stood up with great gravity. "I would ask for a moment's delay, that the society may get out its pocket-handkerchiefs," she said. "My piece is an affecting one. I didn't mean it, but it came so. We cannot always be cheerful." Here she heaved a sigh which set the SSUC to laughing, and began. A Scotch Poem. Wee crimson tippet willy wink weighs me drear dree and dra, a waeful thocht, a fearsome flea, a wother wind and a. Sair, sair thy mither sabs her lane, her een, her moo are what, her cauld kail hae the corbies ta'en, and grievously she grat. Ah me, the southering of the wind, ah me, the waesome mither, ah me, the bairnies left ahind, the shither, hither, blither. "What does it mean?" cried the girls, as Rose folded up the paper and sat down. "Mean?" said Rose. "I'm sure I don't know. It's Scotch, I tell you. It's the kind of thing that people read, and then they say, 'One of the loveliest gems that Burns ever wrote.' I thought I'd see if I couldn't do one too. Anybody can, I find. It's not at all difficult." All the poems having been read, Katy now proposed that they should play Word and Question. She and Clover were accustomed to the game at home, but to some of the others it was quite new. Each girl was furnished with a slip of paper and a pencil, and was told to write a word at the top of the paper, fold it over, and pass it to her next left-hand neighbor. "Dear me, I don't know what to write," said Mary Silver. "Oh, write anything," said Clover. So Mary obediently wrote anything and folded it over. "What next?" asked Alice Gibbons. "Now a question," said Katy. "Write it under the word, and fold over again. No, Amy, not on the fold. Don't you see? If you do, the writing will be on the wrong side of the paper when we come to read." The questions were more troublesome than the words, and the girls sat frowning and biting their pencil tops for some minutes before all were done. As the slips were handed in, Katy dropped them into the lid of her work-basket, and thoroughly mixed and stirred them up. "Now," she said, passing it about, "each draw one, read, and write a rhyme in which the word is introduced and the question answered. It needn't be more than 2 lines, unless you like. Here, Rose, it's your turn first." "Oh, what a hard game!" cried some of the girls, but pretty soon they grew interested and began to work over their verses. "I should uncommonly like to know who wrote this abominable word," said Rose in a tone of despair. "Clover, you rascal, I believe it was you." Clover peeped over her shoulder, nodded, and laughed. "Very well, then," snatching up Clover's slip, and putting her own in its place, "you can just write on it yourself. I shan't. I never heard of such a word in my life. You made it up for the occasion, you know you did." "I didn't. It's in the Bible," replied Clover, setting to work composedly on the fresh paper. But when Rose opened Clover's slip, she groaned again. "It's just as bad as the other," she cried. "Do change back again, Clovy, that's a dear." "No, indeed," said Clover, guarding her paper. "You've changed once, and now you must keep what you have." Rose made a face, chewed her pencil a while, and then began to write rapidly. For some minutes not a word was spoken. "I've done," said Esther Dearborn at last, flinging her paper into the basket lid. "So have I," said Katy. One by one the papers were collected and jumbled into a heap. Then Katy, giving all a final shake, drew out one, opened it, and read: Word, radishes. Question, how do you like your clergymen done? How do I like them done? Well, that depends. I like them done on sleepy, drowsy Sundays. I like them underdone on other days. Perhaps a little overdone on Mondays. But I always prefer them old as pa, and not like radishes, all red and raw. "Oh, what a rhyme!" cried Clover. "Well, what is one to do?" said Ellen Gray. Then she stopped and bit her lip, remembering that no one was supposed to know who wrote the separate papers. "Aha! It's yours, is it, Ellen?" said Rose. "You're an awfully clever girl and an ornament to the SSUC. Go on, Katy." Katy opened the second slip. Word, anything. Question, would you rather be a greater fool than you seem, or seem a greater fool than you are? "I wouldn't be a fool for anything, my dear, if I could help it, but I can't, I fear." "Not bad," said Rose, nodding her head at Sally Alsop, who blushed crimson. The third paper ran: Word, Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Question, does your mother know you're out? Rose and Clover exchanged looks. "Why, of course my mother knows it, for she sent me out herself. She told me to run quickly, for it wasn't but a mile, but I found it was much farther and my feet grew tired and weary, and I couldn't hurry greatly, so I took a long, long while. Beside I stopped to read your word, a stranger one I never heard. I've met with papistical, that's Pat, but Maher Shalal Hashbaz, what's that?" "Oh, Clovy, you bright little thing," cried Rose in fits of laughter. But Mary Silver looked quite pale. "I never heard of anything so awful," she said. "If that word had come to me, I should have fainted away on the spot. I know I should." Next came Word, buttons. Question, what is the best way to make home happy? To me 'tis quite clear, I can answer this right. Sew on the buttons and sew them on tight. "I suspect that is Amy's," said Esther. "She's such a model for mending and keeping things in order." "It's not fair, guessing aloud in this way," said Sally Alsop. Sally always spoke for Amy, and Amy for Sally. Voice and echo, Rose called them, only, as she remarked, nobody could tell which was echo and which was voice. The next word was Mrs. Nipson, and the question, do you like flowers? Do I like flowers? I will not write a sonnet, singing their beauty as a poet might do. I just attest those on Aunt Nipson's bonnet, because they are like her, all gray and blue, dusty and pinched and fastened on askew, and as for heaven's own buttercups and daisies, I am not good enough to sing their praises. Nobody knew who wrote this verse. Katy suspected Louisa, and Rose suspected Katy. The sixth slip was a very brief one. Word, when. Question, are you willing? If I wasn't willing, I would tell you, but when, oh dear, I can't." "What an extraordinary rhyme," began Clover, but Rose spied poor Mary blushing and looking distressed, and hastily interposed. "It's very good, I'm sure. I wish I'd written it. Go on, Katy." So Katy went on. Word, unfeeling. Question, which would you rather do, or go fishing? "I don't feel up to fitching or such, and so, if you please, I'd rather do which?" "I don't seem to see the word in that poem," said Rose. "The distinguished author will please write another." The distinguished author made no reply to this suggestion, but after a minute or two Esther Dearborn, quite disinterestedly, as she stated, remarked that, after all, to don't feel was pretty much the same as unfeeling. There was a little chorus of groans at this, and Katy said she should certainly impose a fine if such dodges and evasions were practiced again. This was the first meeting, however, and she would be merciful. After this speech she unfolded another paper. It ran, "Word, flee. Question, what would you do, love?" "What would I do, love? Well, I do not know. How can I tell till you are more explicit? If 'twere a rose you held me, I would smell it. If 'twere a mouth you held me, I would kiss it. If 'twere a frog, I'd scream then furies louder. If 'twere a flea, I'd fetch the lion's powder." Only 2 slips remained. One was Katy's own. She knew it by the way in which it was folded, and had almost instinctively avoided and left it for the last. Now, however, she took courage and opened it. The word was measles, and the question, who was the grandmother of invention? These were the lines. The night was horribly dark. The measles broke out in the ark. Little Japheth and Shem and all the young hams were screaming at once for potatoes and clams. "What shall I do?" said poor Mrs. Noah, "all alone by myself in this terrible shower? I know what I'll do. I'll step down in the hold and wake up a lioness grim and old, and tie her close to the children's door, and give her a ginger cake to roar at the top of her voice for an hour or more. And I'll tell the children to cease their din, or I'll let that grim old party in, to stop their squeezels and likewise their measles." She practiced this with the greatest success. She was everyone's grandmother, I guess. "That's much the best of all," pronounced Alice Gibbons. "I wonder who wrote it." "Dear me, did you like it so much?" said Rose, simpering and doing her best to blush. "Did you really write it?" said Mary, but Louisa laughed and exclaimed, "No use, Rosie, you can't take us in. We know better." "Now for the last," said Katy. "The word is buckwheat, and the question, what is the origin of dreams?" "When the nuns are sweetly sleeping, Mrs. Nipson comes a-creeping, creeping like a kitty cat from door to door, as she listens to their slumbers, and most carefully she numbers, counting for every nun a nunlet snore. And the nuns in sweet forgetfulness who lie, dreaming of buckwheat cakes, parental love, and pie, moan softly, twist and turn, and see black cats and fiends who frolic in their glee, and nightmares prancing wildly do abound, while Mrs. Nipson makes her nightly round." "Who did write that?" exclaimed Rose. Nobody answered. The girls looked at each other, and Rose scrutinized them all with sharp glances. "Well, I never saw such creatures for keeping their countenances," she said. "Somebody is as bold as brass. Didn't you see how I blushed when my piece was read?" "You monkey," whispered Clover, who at that moment caught sight of the handwriting on the paper. Rose gave her a warning pinch, and the both subsided into an unseen giggle. "What, the tea-bell?" cried everybody. "We wanted to play another game." "It's a complete success," whispered Rose ecstatically as they went down the hall. "The girls all say they never had such a good time in their lives. I'm so glad I didn't die when the measles when I was little." "Well," demanded Lily, "so the High and Mighty Society has had a meeting. How did it go off?" "Delicious," replied Rose, smacking her lips as at the recollection of something very nice. "But you mustn't ask any questions, Lily. Outsiders have nothing to do with the SSUC. Our proceedings are strictly private." She ran downstairs with Katy. "I think you're real mean," called Lily after them. Then she said to herself, "They're just trying to tease. I know it was stupid." End of chapter 6.